The Beta betrayed the girl who fed him in the dungeons, until the Alpha King named her his chosen. The iron bars felt cold against Ilara's fingertips as she slid the wooden bowl through the narrow gap at the bottom of the cell door. Inside, she could hear ragged breathing, the sound of someone barely clinging to consciousness. The dungeons beneath the Silver Crest packhouse reeked of mildew and despair, a place where wolves were sent to be forgotten. "Eat," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant drip of water echoing through the stone corridors. "You need your strength." A shadow moved in the darkness, and then she saw him, gaunt, bruised, his once proud frame reduced to skin and bone. Marcus had been imprisoned here for 3 weeks, accused of treason against the pack. No trial, no evidence presented. Just the word of Alpha Donovan, whose paranoia had grown with each passing year. Ilara didn't know if Marcus was guilty. She only knew that leaving someone to starve went against everything her mother had taught her before the fever took her 5 years ago. Every night for the past week, Ilara had snuck down here with whatever scraps she could steal from the kitchen: bread, cold meat, sometimes an apple she'd hidden in her apron. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us create more content like this. Marcus crawled forward, his chains rattling against the stone floor. In the dim torchlight filtering from the hallway, she could see his eyes, deep brown, filled with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or calculation. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "If they catch you, you'll end up in here with me." Ilara pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 19, she was invisible in the pack hierarchy, an Omega without family, without status, working in the kitchens for her keep. No one noticed when she disappeared for 10 minutes each night. "Everyone deserves to eat," she said simply. He studied her face through the bars, and for a moment something like shame flickered across his features. Then he reached for the bowl, his movements weak but deliberate. "You're different from the others," Marcus said between bites. "They walk past here like I don't exist. Maybe they're just scared." "Of what? A chained wolf?" He laughed bitterly. "I was Beta of this pack. I stood at Donovan's right hand for 7 years, and the moment I questioned his judgment, the moment I suggested we couldn't keep stealing territory from neighboring packs without consequences, he threw me down here to rot." Ilara had heard whispers about Marcus's fall from grace. The official story was that he'd been caught conspiring with the rival Crimson Moon Pack, planning to overthrow Alpha Donovan, but the kitchen staff gossiped, and in their gossip, she'd heard different versions: that Marcus had refused to participate in a raid on a human settlement, that he'd challenged the Alpha's decision to execute a group of young wolves for a minor infraction. "I don't know if you're innocent," Ilara admitted, her fingers gripping the cold bars. "But I know what it's like to be powerless, to have no one stand up for you." Marcus set down the empty bowl and moved closer to the bars. In the torchlight, she could see the extent of his injuries: a gash across his temple that hadn't healed properly, bruises that mottled his skin like storm clouds, the hollow look of someone who'd given up hope. "When I get out of here," he said quietly, "I won't forget this, what you've done for me." "If you get out," Ilara corrected gently. "When?" he insisted. "Alpha Donovan can't keep me locked up forever. There are wolves who still remember what I did for this pack, who know I'm not a traitor. They'll speak up. They'll demand justice." Ilara wanted to believe him, but she'd lived in the Silver Crest pack long enough to know how power worked. Justice was a luxury afforded to those with strength, with family, with connections. For people like her, and now apparently for people like Marcus, there was only survival. "I should go," she said, retrieving the empty bowl. "The night patrol will be making their rounds soon." "Wait." Marcus's hand shot through the bars, his fingers brushing against her wrist. The touch was brief. But it sent a jolt through her, warm despite the cold of the dungeon, human despite the beast that lived beneath his skin. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Names had power. They created connections, threads that could be pulled and unraveled. But his eyes held such earnestness, such desperate need for something beyond these stone walls. "Ilara," she whispered. "Ilara," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. "Thank you. Truly." She nodded and pulled away, her footsteps quick and silent as she ascended the narrow staircase that led back to the main level of the packhouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, partly from the fear of discovery, partly from something else she couldn't quite name. The kitchen was empty when she returned. The fires banked for the night. She washed the bowl in the stone sink, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. Through the window, she could see the full moon rising over the forest, its silver light painting the trees in shades of pearl and shadow. Somewhere out there, beyond the pack's territory, other wolves ran free under that moon. They hunted and played, lived and loved, without the weight of Alpha Donovan's paranoia crushing down on them. Sometimes Ilara wondered what it would be like to just walk away, to disappear into the wilderness and never look back. But she had nowhere to go. This pack, as broken as it was all she knew. The next evening, Ilara prepared Marcus's meal with extra care. She'd managed to save a piece of roasted chicken from the Alpha's dinner, along with fresh bread and a handful of berries she'd picked from the garden. It wasn't much, but it was better than the stale scraps she usually brought. The dungeons seemed darker than usual as she descended the stairs, the torches burning lower in their sconces. She could hear voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the complex, guards, probably, playing dice to pass the time. "Marcus," she called softly as she approached his cell. He was waiting by the bars, looking stronger than he had the night before. The food was helping. She could see it in the way he held himself, in the clarity of his gaze. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, reaching for the bowl she offered. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night." "Oh?" Ilara settled onto the cold floor, her back against the stone wall opposite his cell. She knew she shouldn't linger. It was dangerous. But these brief conversations had become the highlight of her days. "About what you said, about being powerless." Marcus ate slowly, savoring each bite. "You don't have to be, you know. There are ways to gain influence, even for an Omega." "Like what, become the Alpha's mistress?" Ilara laughed humorlessly. "No, thank you. I'm serious." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The pack is unstable. Donovan's leadership has made us vulnerable. There are wolves in neighboring territories who would pay well for information about our patrols, our weaknesses." Ilara's blood ran cold. "You're talking about betrayal." "I'm talking about survival." Marcus's eyes gleamed in the torchlight, and for the first time, Ilara saw something predatory there, something that made her want to step back. "When this pack falls, and it will fall, Ilara, it's only a matter of time, you want to be on the winning side." "I don't want to be on any side," she said, standing up abruptly. "I just want to live quietly and hurt no one." "That's not how the world works." He gripped the bars, his knuckles white. "You think your kindness will protect you? The moment this pack is overrun, you'll be collateral damage. Unless you have something to offer the conquerors." Ilara backed toward the stairs, the bowl forgotten on the floor. "I thought you said you were innocent, that you weren't a traitor." "I am innocent," Marcus insisted. "But Donovan's accusations have opened my eyes. If he can throw away 7 years of loyalty on a whim, then what do I owe him? What do any of us owe a leader who sees enemies in every shadow?" "I won't help you destroy this pack," Ilara said firmly. "Whatever its flaws, it's home to hundreds of wolves who've done nothing wrong." Marcus's expression darkened. then you're a fool. And when the end comes, don't expect mercy for your naivety. Ilara ran up the stairs, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Behind her, she could hear Marcus calling her name, his voice echoing off the stone walls, but she didn't look back. That night, she lay awake in her small room above the kitchens, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. Had Marcus always been planning betrayal, or had imprisonment twisted him? And what was she supposed to do with this information? If she told Alpha Donovan, he'd probably have her thrown in the dungeons alongside Marcus for even speaking to a prisoner. But if she stayed silent and something terrible happened, could she live with that guilt? The next morning brought news that rippled through the pack house like wildfire. Alpha King Dimitri of the Northern Territories was coming to Silver Crest. The Alpha King, ruler of all packs in the northern United States, arbiter of disputes, enforcer of ancient laws. His visit was unprecedented. Alpha Kings rarely left their strongholds unless something was seriously wrong. "I heard he's investigating reports of treaty violations," whispered Sarah, one of the other kitchen workers, as they prepared breakfast. "Someone's been killing humans in our territory. If the Alpha King finds proof, he could strip Donovan of his title." Ilara's hands trembled as she chopped vegetables. The Alpha King's arrival changed everything. If Dimitri was as powerful and just as the stories claimed, maybe Marcus would actually get a fair hearing. Maybe he'd be released. And whatever dark plans he was weaving would come to nothing. Or maybe things would get much, much worse. The pack house exploded into frantic activity as word of the Alpha King's imminent arrival spread. Every surface had to be scrubbed, every piece of silver polished, every room aired out and perfected. Alpha Donovan stalked through the corridors, barking orders, his anxiety palpable. Even his most loyal wolves kept their distance, sensing the volatility in their leader. Ilara worked from dawn until well past midnight, her hands raw from scrubbing floors and washing dishes. She had no time to think about Marcus, no time to dwell on his troubling words or her own confused feelings. The entire pack was caught up in the whirlwind of preparation. 3 days later, the Alpha King arrived with a retinue of 20 wolves, all of them radiating power and discipline. Ilara caught only glimpses of them from the kitchen windows, tall figures in dark clothing, moving with the coordinated precision of warriors who'd fought together for years. But it was the Alpha King himself who took her breath away. Dmitri Volkov stood at least 6.5 feet tall, his shoulders broad, his presence commanding in a way that made Alpha Donovan look like a nervous child. His hair was dark as midnight, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and hard lines. But it was his eyes that captivated Ilara when she finally saw him up close, pale grey, like winter ice, seeing everything and missing nothing. She'd been carrying a tray of refreshments to the Great Hall when she nearly collided with him in the corridor. The tray wobbled dangerously, and before she could drop it, his hand shot out and steadied it with casual grace. "Careful," he said, his voice deep and slightly accented, Russian maybe, or Eastern European. "I'm so sorry, Alpha King," Ilara stammered, her eyes fixed on the floor. Protocol demanded she not look directly at him. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. She raised her eyes slowly, expecting to see anger or annoyance. Instead, she found something like curiosity in his expression. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ilara, Alpha King. I work in the kitchens." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Around them, the corridor had gone silent. Other wolves watching this strange exchange, probably wondering why the Alpha King was bothering to speak to a lowly Omega. "You're exhausted," Dmitri observed. "When was the last time you slept properly?" The question caught her off guard. Sleep is a luxury these days, Alpha King. There's much to do." "Yes," I can see that Alpha Donovan has his pack working themselves to the bone to impress me. There was disapproval in his tone. Tell me, Ilara from the kitchens, how long have you served this pack? All my life, Alpha King. I was born here. And are you happy? What a strange question. Happiness was another luxury, not something people like her got to consider. But there was something in his gaze that demanded honesty. I'm alive, she said carefully. In troubled times, that's enough. Dimitri's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Diplomatic, I appreciate that. He released the tray and she clutched it tightly. Carry on, Ilara, and get some rest when you can. That's not a suggestion. He moved past her, his wolves falling into step behind him, and Ilara stood frozen in the corridor for a long moment, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. That evening, after the formal dinner she'd helped prepare and serve, Ilara finally had a moment to breathe. The Alpha King and his retinue had retired to their quarters, Alpha Donovan had disappeared into his study, and the packhouse had settled into an uneasy quiet. She should have gone to bed. Her body ached, her eyes burned with fatigue, and she had to be up before dawn to start breakfast preparations. But guilt gnawed at her. She hadn't been to see Marcus in 4 days. He'd be starving by now. The dungeons were even more heavily guarded than usual, with 2 of the Alpha King's wolves standing watch at the entrance. Ilara's stomach sank. There was no way she could sneak past them. She was about to turn back when one of the guards, a woman with sharp features and alert eyes, spoke. "You're the kitchen girl, Ilara." "Yes," Ilara admitted, surprised the guard knew her name. "The Alpha King wants to see you. Follow me." Fear spiked through her chest. Had someone seen her visiting Marcus? Was she about to be arrested? But she had no choice except to follow as the guard led her not to the dungeons, but to the Alpha King's temporary quarters in the East Wing. The room was larger than her entire living space, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed and a stone fireplace where flames crackled and danced. Alpha King Dimitri stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit forest. He turned when she entered, dismissing the guard with a subtle gesture. "Do you know why I'm here, Ilara?" he asked without preamble. "To investigate treaty violations, Alpha King. Partly, but I'm also here because I received concerning reports about this pack's internal affairs. Specifically, about wolves being imprisoned without trial, denied basic rights under the old laws." His grey eyes pinned her in place. "I understand there's a beta named Marcus in the dungeons. How long has he been there?" Ilara's mouth went dry. 3 weeks, Alpha King, maybe 4. "And what are the charges against him?" "Treason, I believe, conspiring with rival packs." "Do you believe he's guilty?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she didn't fully understand. If she defended Marcus, and he truly was a traitor, she'd look foolish. But if she condemned him, and he was innocent, she'd be complicit in injustice. "I don't know if he's guilty," Ilara said finally, "but I know he's been starving down there. I know no evidence has been presented, and I know—" She hesitated, wondering if she was about to make a terrible mistake. "I know that imprisonment has changed him, made him bitter, maybe desperate enough to become what he's accused of being." Dimitri moved closer and she caught his scent, pine and snow and something wild. "You've been visiting him, bringing him food." It wasn't a question. He knew. Somehow, he knew. "Yes, Alpha King." "Why?" "Because letting someone starve is wrong, regardless of what they've done." For a long moment, Dimitri said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost warm. "You have a good heart, Ilara. That's rarer than you might think." "I'm just trying to do what's right." "What's right?" He shook his head slowly. "I've been ruling for 15 years, and I still struggle with that question sometimes. but I'll tell you what I know. Alpha Donovan is paranoid and unstable. His leadership has brought this pack to the brink of collapse, and tomorrow I'm going to interrogate Marcus personally. I'll determine the truth of these accusations. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Alpha King. Don't thank me yet. His expression grew serious. If Marcus is guilty, he'll face execution under the old laws. But if he's innocent... Dimitri's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Then Alpha Donovan will have to answer for his crimes. This pack will need new leadership. Ilara's head spun. I don't understand why you're telling me this. Because I need to know if there's anyone in this pack worth saving, Dimitri said bluntly. Tomorrow will bring change, one way or another, and I'm curious to see where you'll stand when the dust settles. He dismissed her then, and Ilara returned to her room, more confused than ever. The Alpha King's words echoed in her mind. Where would she stand? She'd never had power, never had choices. She was just an Omega trying to survive. But maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. The next day dawned grey and cold, with clouds heavy enough to promise rain. Ilara went through her morning duties in a daze, her thoughts returning again and again to what was happening in the dungeons. Was Marcus being interrogated right now? What would he say? Would he mention their conversations, her visits? Around mid-morning, a commotion erupted in the main hall. Raised voices, the sound of furniture scraping against stone, and then Alpha Donovan's roar of rage echoing through the pack house. This is an outrage. I am Alpha of this pack. You have no right. I have every right. The Alpha King's voice was calm, but unyielding. The old laws are clear. You imprisoned a member of your pack without evidence, without trial, and subjected him to torture. That is grounds for removal. Ilara abandoned her post and crept toward the great hall, where a crowd had gathered. She could see Alpha Donovan, his face purple with fury, facing off against Dimitri. Between them, supported by 2 guards, stood Marcus, alive, but looking worse than ever. "Tell them," Dimitri commanded Marcus. "Tell everyone what you told me." Marcus raised his head, and his eyes scanned the assembled wolves until they landed on Ilara. For one brief moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "I told the Alpha King everything," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the hall. "How Donovan has been orchestrating raids on human settlements to fund his personal wealth, how he's been hoarding resources while pack members starve, how he threatened to kill anyone who questioned him." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Ilara's hand flew to her mouth. This was what she'd hoped for, justice, accountability. So why did she feel such dread? "And," Marcus continued, his eyes still locked on Ilara, "I told him about the Omega who showed me kindness when everyone else had abandoned me, the one who proved that there's still good in this pack worth fighting for." All eyes turned to Ilara. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but she was frozen in place by the weight of their attention. "Ilara," Alpha King Dimitri said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Come forward." Her legs moved automatically, carrying her through the parting crowd until she stood in the center of the great hall. This close, she could see the calculating look in Marcus's eyes, could feel the waves of fury rolling off Alpha Donovan. "This Omega," Dimitri continued, his hand gesturing toward her, "showed mercy to a prisoner when she had no obligation to do so. She risked punishment to uphold the basic principles of decency that every pack should value." His grey eyes swept across the assembled wolves. "She embodies the kind of character this pack needs in its leadership." Ilara's heart stopped. "Alpha King, I don't—" "Under the old laws," Dimitri spoke over her protest. "When an alpha is removed for misconduct, a new leader must be chosen. That leader can come from within the pack or from outside it. They can be selected by combat or by decree of the Alpha King. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I choose Ilara. The hall exploded in chaos, wolves shouting over each other, some in protest, others in disbelief. Alpha Donovan lunged forward, but the Alpha King's guards restrained him, and through it all, Ilara stood frozen, her mind unable to process what she just heard. No, she whispered. No, I can't. I'm nobody. I'm just... You're exactly what this pack needs, Dimitri said firmly. He stepped closer, his presence commanding silence from the assembled wolves. You've lived at the bottom of this hierarchy. You know what it's like to be overlooked, to be powerless. You won't forget that when you hold power yourself. But I don't know how to lead, Ilara protested desperately. You'll learn. I'll personally oversee your training for the next 6 months. Dimitri's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and steady. And you won't be alone. The beta position will need to be filled. I'll serve as her beta, Marcus interjected quickly, stepping forward despite his injuries. I owe her my life. I'll dedicate myself to supporting her leadership. Ilara stared at him, remembering his words in the dungeon about betrayal and survival. Could she trust him? Did she have a choice? No, she heard herself say, surprising everyone, including herself. If I'm to lead this pack, then I choose my own beta. And I choose. Her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on Sarah from the kitchen, who had always been kind, who had quietly helped others without seeking recognition. Sarah, if she'll accept. Sarah looked as shocked as Ilara felt, but after a moment she nodded. I'll accept. If you truly believe I can help. I do, Ilara said, her voice growing stronger. She turned to Marcus, seeing the flash of anger in his eyes before he masked it. You've suffered greatly, and for that, I'm sorry. But I heard what you said in the dungeon, about betrayal, about working with enemies. I can't have a beta whose loyalty is uncertain. You're making a mistake, Marcus said coldly. I was offering you experience, knowledge, and I'm choosing character over experience. Ilara interrupted. This pack has had enough of wolves who see power as something to exploit. We need to rebuild trust, and that starts with me trusting the people around me. Dimitri's hand squeezed her shoulder approvingly. Well said. Marcus, you're free to leave the dungeons, but you'll remain under observation. If you prove your loyalty over time, there will be a place for you in this pack. But that place won't be at Ilara's right hand. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly and stepped back into the crowd. Ilara could feel his gaze on her, burning, resentful, but she forced herself not to look away from the Alpha King. What about Donovan? Someone called from the crowd. Alpha Donovan will be escorted to the Northern Territories to stand trial for his crimes, Dimitri announced. If found guilty, he'll be stripped of his title permanently and imprisoned. Until then, Ilara is Alpha of the Silver Crest Pack, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. The crowd began to disperse, some wolves looking hopeful, others skeptical, many simply confused. Ilara felt like she was drowning in a sea of expectations she never asked for. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to live quietly, hurt no one, and fade into obscurity. But life, she was learning, rarely followed the plans of mice or omegas. That evening, after being fitted for new clothes befitting her sudden status, after receiving a crash course in pack hierarchy from the Alpha King's advisors, after fielding questions and concerns from dozens of wolves she'd barely spoken to before, Ilara finally found herself alone in the Alpha's quarters. Her quarters now, though the idea seemed absurd. She sank onto the edge of the massive bed, her head in her hands. The room smelled like Alpha Donovan, musk and aggression and fear. She'd have to change everything, make it her own somehow, but right now she was too overwhelmed to think about interior decorating. A knock at the door made her look up. "Come in." Alpha King Dimitri entered, carrying 2 glasses of amber liquid. "You look like you could use this." "I don't drink," Ilara said automatically. "Tonight you do." He pressed 1 glass into her hand and settled into the chair across from her. "To survival." She took a tentative sip and immediately coughed as the whiskey burned down her throat. Dimitri chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that seemed at odds with his intimidating presence. "I have no idea what I'm doing," Ilara admitted once she caught her breath. "No new alpha does," Dimitri replied, "but you have good instincts. Choosing Sarah as your beta was smart. She's loyal, she knows the pack's inner workings, and she won't try to manipulate you. Unlike Marcus." "Unlike Marcus," Dimitri agreed. "You were right not to trust him. In the dungeon, he was planning to sell information about this pack to the Crimson Moon Alpha. He only confessed to me because he thought it would curry favor, that I'd reward his supposed honesty." Ilara's stomach churned. She'd been right to be wary, but it still hurt. "I felt sorry for him. I thought I was helping." "You were helping," Dimitri said firmly. "You kept him alive long enough for justice to be served. That matters. But compassion doesn't mean blindness. You can be kind without being naive, Ilara. That's the balance you'll need to find as Alpha." She studied him over the rim of her glass. In the firelight, his harsh features seemed softer, more human. "Why did you really choose me? There must be stronger wolves in this pack, more experienced ones." "Because this pack doesn't need strength right now. It needs healing." Dimitri leaned forward, his grey eyes intent. "Donovan ruled through fear. That approach might work in the short term, but it destroys pack bonds, creates paranoia, makes wolves turn on each other. You represent something different, a fresh start." "I'm terrified," Ilara whispered. "Good. Fear will keep you humble, keep you from repeating Donovan's mistakes." He stood, setting down his empty glass. "I'll be staying for the next 6 months to help with the transition. You'll spend your mornings with me, learning pack law, history, and combat. Afternoons you'll work with Sarah to address the pack's immediate needs. Evenings are for pack gatherings. You need to be visible, approachable." 6 months with the Alpha King. The thought should have been intimidating, but instead, Ilara felt a flutter of something she didn't want to examine too closely. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me when I don't even believe in myself." Dimitri's hand reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unexpectedly tender. "You'll surprise yourself, Ilara. I'm certain of that." After he left, Ilara sat alone in the vast room, listening to the crackling fire and the distant sounds of the pack house settling for the night. Somewhere out there, Marcus was nursing his resentment, planning his next move. Alpha Donovan was locked away, his reign ended, and hundreds of wolves were looking to her, an Omega who'd been invisible just days ago, to lead them into an uncertain future. She thought about her mother, wondered what she would have made of all this. "Be kind," she'd always said. "Be brave when you must, but never forget your compassion." Ilara took another small sip of whiskey, letting it warm her from the inside out. She didn't know if she was ready for this, but ready or not, tomorrow would come, and she would face it as Alpha. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of responsibility and learning. Ilara woke before dawn each day for combat training with Alpha King Dimitri, who proved to be a demanding but patient teacher. He taught her not just how to fight, but how to carry herself with authority, how to project confidence even when she felt none. An Alpha's power comes partially from physical strength. He explained during one brutal sparring session that left her gasping on the training ground, but mostly it comes from here. He tapped his temple, and here, he placed his hand over his heart. "Your pack needs to believe in you. Make them believe." The afternoons were spent with Sarah, addressing the mountain of issues that had accumulated under Donovan's neglect. Food stores needed to be redistributed fairly. Border patrols had to be reorganized. Disputes between pack members required mediation. The work was endless and exhausting, but Ilara threw herself into it with determination. She made mistakes, plenty of them. She accidentally insulted a visiting alpha by not understanding the formal protocols. She miscalculated the pack's budget and had to implement temporary rationing. She trusted the wrong wolf with a sensitive task and had to deal with the fallout. But slowly, painfully, she learned. And the pack, to her surprise, began to trust her. The Omega who'd worked in the kitchens, who'd shown kindness to a prisoner when no one else would, who chose mercy over vengeance. She became a symbol of hope for wolves who'd lived too long under fear. Marcus kept his distance, fulfilling his duties as a regular pack member, but never speaking to Ilara directly. She could feel his eyes on her sometimes, watchful and calculating, but he made no move against her. Perhaps Dimitri's presence kept him in check, or perhaps he was simply biding his time. It was during the 3rd month of her reign that Ilara first noticed the change in how Alpha King Dimitri looked at her. They were in the Alpha's study, her study now, though she still thought of it as borrowed space, reviewing treaty documents. The evening sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. "You're doing well," Dimitri said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Better than I expected, honestly." Ilara glanced up from the scroll she'd been reading. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's supposed to be the truth." His lips quirked into that half-smile she'd come to recognize. "When I first chose you, I thought you'd be adequate. A placeholder until someone stronger could step forward. But you've surprised me, Ilara. You're not just adequate, you're becoming a true alpha." Warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I had a good teacher. You had determination and heart. I just showed you how to channel it." He stood and moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the dying light. "In 3 months, I'll have to return to the Northern Territories. There are other packs that need my attention, other problems to solve." The thought of him leaving created a hollow feeling in Ilara's stomach. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, to his steady guidance, to the way he challenged her to be better. More than that, she'd started to look forward to their time together, the early morning training sessions, the evening discussions, the rare moments of laughter they shared. "The pack will miss you," she said carefully. "Will you miss me?" The question was direct, like everything else about Dimitri. Ilara set down her scroll and met his gaze. In his grey eyes, she saw the same uncertainty she felt, the same unspoken tension that had been building between them for weeks. "Yes," she admitted, "I'll miss you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just in front of her chair. This close, she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was trying to control some strong emotion. "I'm twice your age," Dimitri said quietly. "I've ruled for 15 years. I've seen packs rise and fall, watched wolves make every mistake imaginable. I thought I was beyond being surprised by anyone or anything." "But," Ilara prompted, her heart hammering against her ribs, "but you surprise me constantly. Your strength, your wisdom, your refusal to become hardened despite everything you've endured." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I came here to fix a broken pack. I didn't expect to find someone who would fix something broken in me." Before she could respond, before she could fully process what he was saying, Dimitri kissed her. His lips were warm and sure against hers, the kiss both gentle and demanding. Speaking of desires held in check for too long, Ilara's hands came up to grip his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world tilted. She'd been kissed before, brief, fumbling encounters in her youth that had left her feeling nothing. This was different. This set her blood on fire, made her forget about treaties and responsibilities, and the thousand reasons why this was probably a terrible idea. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dmitri rested his forehead against hers. "This is inappropriate," he said, though he made no move to step away. "You're under my protection, my tutelage, the power dynamic—" "I'm an alpha now," Ilara interrupted. "That means I get to make my own choices, and I choose this. I choose you, if you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" Dmitri laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "Ilara, I've been fighting this attraction since the moment you looked up at me in that corridor, with your exhausted eyes and defiant chin. I've been trying to convince myself it's just protectiveness, just pride in a successful student, but it's more than that, so much more." They stood there in the fading light, two wolves from completely different worlds, holding on to each other as if they could stop time itself. Outside, the pack went about its business, unaware that their alpha had just crossed an invisible line, had claimed something for herself instead of always giving. That night marked a change in their relationship. They were still teacher and student during the day, Alpha King and newly appointed Alpha, but in the evenings they were simply Dmitri and Ilara, two people learning to trust each other with more than just pack politics. He told her about his past, about the war that had killed his parents and left him Alpha King at 19, about the loneliness of power and the burden of always being right. She told him about her mother, about the fear and uncertainty of living as an Omega, about the strange guilt she sometimes felt for having risen so high when others remained trapped at the bottom. "You can't save everyone," Dmitri said one night as they sat before the fire in her quarters. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "That's the hardest lesson for any leader with a conscience." "But I have to try," Ilara insisted. "Otherwise, what's the point of power? The point is stability, order, ensuring the pack survives." But even as he said it, Dmitri smiled ruefully. "Though, I suppose if all leaders thought like me, we'd have a very cold, efficient world. Maybe what we need is more leaders like you, ones who remember that wolves are more than just chess pieces to be moved around." As the 4th month approached, Ilara's confidence in her role grew stronger. She'd successfully negotiated a trade agreement with the neighboring Crimson Moon Pack, turning former enemies into tentative allies. She'd implemented a new system for resolving disputes that emphasized mediation over punishment, and she'd started a program to train young wolves in leadership, ensuring that the next generation would be better prepared than she'd been. The pack was healing. She could see it in the way wolves smiled more freely, in how the tension that had permeated every interaction under Donovan's rule had eased. Children played in the courtyards without fear. Elders shared stories around evening fires. The pack house had become a home again, not a prison. But not everyone was happy with the changes. It started with small acts of rebellion, a patrol that accidentally missed their scheduled rounds, supplies that went missing from the storage houses, rumors spread about Ilara's competence, nothing major enough to address directly, but enough to create unease. Sarah brought the concerns to Ilara during one of their afternoon working sessions. "There's a group that's unhappy with your leadership," she said carefully. "They think you're too soft, that the pack needs a stronger hand." "Let me guess," Ilara said, a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Marcus is involved." "He's at the center of it," Sarah confirmed. "He's been talking to wolves who are loyal to Donovan, convincing them that you're weak, that the Alpha King chose you to keep the pack subservient. He's building support for a challenge. In the old days, disputes over pack leadership were settled through formal combat. A challenger could demand the right to fight the Alpha for control. If the challenger won, they became the new leader. If they lost, they were typically exiled or executed. Ilara had trained hard for months, but Marcus was a career warrior, a former beta with years of combat experience. In a fair fight, she wasn't sure she could win. "When?" she asked. "Probably during the full moon gathering next week," Sarah said. "It's when the whole pack will be assembled. Maximum impact." Ilara nodded slowly, her mind already working through options. She could try to exile Marcus preemptively, but that would look like fear, would validate his claims about her weakness. She could appeal to the Alpha King to intervene, but that would undermine her authority, make it seem like she couldn't handle her own pack. No. If Marcus wanted a challenge, she'd give him one, and she'd face it on her own terms. That evening she sought out Dimitri in the training grounds. He was working through sword forms, his movements fluid and deadly, each strike precise enough to kill. She watched for a moment, appreciating the lethal grace of him before stepping into his line of sight. "I need to learn how to kill someone," Ilara said without preamble. Dimitri lowered his sword, his expression sharpening. "What happened?" She explained about Marcus, about the challenge she knew was coming. Dimitri's jaw tightened with anger, but he didn't try to talk her out of facing it. "You've learned defense," he said, "and basic combat. But you're right, we need to focus on finishing moves, techniques specifically designed to end a fight quickly." He set down his sword and moved to the weapons rack, selecting a pair of shorter blades. "For the next week, we train every moment we can. No distractions, no other responsibilities. Sarah can handle the pack's daily needs. Your only job is to survive." The week that followed was the most brutal of Ilara's life. Dimitri pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had, forcing her to fight even when her muscles screamed, even when she was so exhausted she could barely stand. He taught her dirty tricks, how to use an opponent's strength against them, where to strike for maximum damage, how to feint and deceive. "Marcus will underestimate you," Dimitri said during one particularly grueling session. "He'll think he can overpower you with brute force. Use that. Let him waste his energy on attacks that don't connect. Wait for your opening." "And if there is no opening," Ilara panted, blocking his strike with her forearm, "then you create one." He swept her legs, sending her crashing to the ground, but she rolled and came up ready. Good. Again. The night before the full moon gathering, Ilara could barely sleep. Every muscle ached. Her hands were blistered from weapon work, but she felt more prepared than she'd ever been. Dimitri found her on the balcony of her quarters, staring out at the forest, bathed in pre-full moonlight. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and pulled her back against his chest. "You're going to win," he said quietly. "You don't know that." "I do. Because you have something Marcus doesn't. Something worth fighting for." His arms tightened around her. "He fights for pride, for status. You fight for your pack, for the wolves who depend on you. That's a stronger motivation than ego will ever be." Ilara turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. "If something happens to me tomorrow, nothing will happen. But if it does," she insisted, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You made me believe I could be more than what I was born to be." Dimitri's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "You were always destined for greatness, Ilara. I just helped you see it." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a kiss that tasted of promises and tomorrow and hope. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they talked and held each other, memorizing the feel of skin on skin, the sound of heartbeats in the quiet darkness. When dawn finally broke, they dressed together in comfortable silence, preparing for what the day would bring. The full moon gathering was held in the great clearing at the heart of Pack territory, where generations of silver-crest wolves had assembled for important events. As the sun reached its peak, hundreds of wolves gathered, forming a wide circle. The air thrummed with anticipation and anxiety. Ilara stood in the center of the circle, wearing the simple leather fighting garb Dmitri had given her. No armor, no weapons beyond the single blade at her hip. Across from her, Marcus emerged from the crowd, looking stronger than he had in months, his eyes burning with determination and resentment. "I challenge Alpha Ilara for leadership of the Silver Crest Pack," Marcus declared, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Under the old laws, she must accept or step down." Ilara met his gaze steadily. "I accept your challenge. Let the pack witness that this fight is honorable, with no interference from outside wolves." Her eyes flicked briefly to Dmitri, who stood at the edge of the circle with his retinue, his face carefully neutral. "Whatever the outcome, the pack will respect it." The crowd murmured approval. Sarah stepped forward as witness, along with two of the pack's eldest members. They recited the ancient words that had governed challenges for centuries, binding both fighters to the outcome. Then the fight began. Marcus came at her fast, relying on his superior size and strength to overwhelm her quickly. His fist crashed toward her face, but Ilara wasn't there. She'd pivoted, using his momentum to send him stumbling past her. He recovered quickly, spinning with a kick that she barely blocked. For the first few minutes, Ilara simply defended, letting Marcus expend his energy while she conserved hers. She could hear his breathing becoming labored, see the frustration building as his attacks failed to connect solidly. "Stand still and fight," Marcus snarled, feinting left before striking right. This time his fist connected with her ribs, and she felt something crack. Pain exploded through her side, but she rolled with the impact, putting distance between them. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Marcus smiled, sensing victory. "You're weak. You were always weak. The Alpha King made a mistake choosing you." "He made a mistake trusting you," Ilara shot back. She shifted her stance, ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs. "You would have sold out this entire pack to save yourself. That's not strength, that's cowardice." Marcus roared and charged, abandoning strategy for pure rage. And that was the opening Dmitri had trained her to recognize. As Marcus came in with a wild haymaker, Ilara ducked under it, drew her blade in one smooth motion, and drove it up under his ribs. The strike was precise, angled to pierce the heart, exactly as Dmitri had taught her. Marcus's eyes widened in shock. He looked down at the blade buried in his chest, then back at Ilara's face. "How?" he gasped. "I learned," Ilara said quietly. She pulled the blade free, and Marcus collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The clearing erupted in chaos, some wolves cheering, others stunned into silence. Ilara stood over Marcus's body, her blade dripping crimson, her breathing ragged. She felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. Sarah rushed forward with a healer, but it was clear Marcus was beyond saving. He died within moments, his last breath a curse or a prayer. Ilara couldn't tell which. "The challenge is complete," Sarah announced, her voice shaking slightly. "Alpha Ilara has proven her right to lead." The pack began to howl, a traditional acknowledgement of the victor. Even those who had supported Marcus joined in, bound by the outcome they'd agreed to witness. Ilara listened to the sound of her pack, her family, accepting her leadership in blood and victory. Dmitri appeared at her side, steadying her as her adrenaline crashed, and the pain in her ribs became almost unbearable. "The healer," he said urgently to Sarah. "Now!" As hands guided her away from the clearing, as the healer began examining her injuries, Ilara caught sight of the blood on the ground, Marcus's body being carried away. She'd killed him. She'd ended a life to protect her position, her pack. This was what it meant to be Alpha. Not just the authority and respect, but the willingness to make impossible choices, to carry the weight of life and death. "You did what you had to," Dmitri said later, after the healer had wrapped her ribs and given her something for the pain. They were back in her quarters, the full moon rising outside the windows. "Marcus left you no choice." "I know," Ilara said, and she did know. intellectually, but that didn't make it easier. I'm not sure I'll ever forget the look in his eyes when he realized he was dying. You won't, Dmitri said honestly. The first kill never leaves you, but it gets easier to carry, especially when you know it was necessary. He pulled her carefully against him, mindful of her injuries. You proved today that you're not just a compassionate alpha, you're also a strong one. The pack needed to see both sides. In the weeks that followed Marcus's death, the pack settled into a new stability. The wolves who had supported his challenge either accepted Ilara's victory or left to join other packs. Those who remained were united in their loyalty, bound together by shared purpose rather than fear. Ilara threw herself into leadership with renewed determination. She expanded the training programs, strengthened alliances with neighboring packs, and implemented reforms that gave even the lowest-ranked wolves a voice in pack decisions. Sarah proved to be an invaluable beta, handling details that Ilara couldn't oversee personally, and through it all, Dmitri remained her constant support, her teacher and lover, the one person she could be completely honest with about her fears and doubts. But the 6 months were almost over. Soon he would have to return to the Northern Territories, resume his duties as Alpha King. They'd both known from the beginning that this arrangement had an expiration date, but neither had wanted to think about it too closely. It was Sarah who finally forced the conversation. "What happens when the Alpha King leaves?" she asked bluntly one afternoon. "The pack talks about it. They wonder if you'll follow him, or if he'll stay." Ilara had been wondering the same thing. She and Dmitri had never discussed the future beyond the immediate challenges. Their relationship existed in a careful bubble, separate from the realities of duty and responsibility. That evening she brought it up as they sat before the fire in her quarters. "In 2 weeks you'll leave." "Yes," Dmitri said carefully. "My responsibilities call me back. There are matters I've been putting off, pacts that need arbitration." "And us?" Ilara asked, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "What happens to us?" Dmitri was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I've been thinking about that constantly, and I've come to a decision." Ilara's heart clenched. Whatever he was about to say would change everything. She could feel it. "I want you to come with me," Dmitri said, "not as my student or my subordinate, but as my equal, as my chosen mate." He took her hands in his grey eyes intense. "The Northern Territories are vast, multiple packs under my oversight. I need someone I can trust completely, someone who understands leadership and compassion in equal measure. More than that, I need you, Ilara. These months have shown me what I've been missing, a partner, someone to share the burden with." Ilara's breath caught. Chosen mate. Among wolves, that was the highest bond, deeper than marriage, binding 2 wolves together for life. It was a commitment that transcended pack boundaries, that announced to the world that these 2 were one. "The pack needs me," she said, even as her heart yearned to say yes immediately. "I've only been alpha for 6 months. I can't just abandon them." "You wouldn't be," Dmitri assured her. "Sarah has proven herself capable. She could take over as Alpha of Silver Crest. With my backing and yours, the pack is stable now, healed, and you've trained others in leadership. They won't fall back into old patterns." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking you to give up everything you've built. I'm asking you to expand your reach, to help me govern all the northern packs. Together, we could create real change across the territories." Ilara's mind raced with possibilities. The Alpha King's chosen mate would have significant influence, could advocate for reforms across dozens of packs. She could help Omegas everywhere, could ensure that what happened to Marcus, imprisonment without trial, never happened again under their watch. But could she leave Silver Crest? These wolves had been her entire world. This territory was the only home she'd ever known. "I need time to think," she said finally, and to talk to the pack. They deserve to know before I make any decision. Of course, Dimitri agreed. Take whatever time you need. Just know that whatever you decide, my feelings won't change. You've claimed my heart, Ilara. Distance won't alter that. Over the next few days, Ilara wrestled with the decision. She spoke with Sarah, who tearfully assured her that she was ready to be Alpha, that she'd learned from watching Ilara and could continue the work they'd started. She spoke with the pack elders, who gave their blessing, saying that having one of their own become the Alpha King's chosen mate would bring honor to Silvercrest. But it was a conversation with a young Omega named Riley that finally helped Ilara decide. Riley was 12, recently orphaned, working in the kitchens just as Ilara once had. "Is it true you might leave?" Riley asked one evening, her eyes wide with worry. "Maybe," Ilara admitted. "Would that make you sad?" Riley thought about it carefully. "A little, but also, if you go and become important in the big territories, maybe things will get better for people like us everywhere, not just here." Out of the mouths of children, Ilara thought. Riley had articulated exactly what she'd been feeling, but hadn't been able to put into words. She could help a few hundred wolves here in Silvercrest, or she could help thousands across all the northern territories. The choice, when she finally made it, felt both terrifying and right. The night before Dimitri was scheduled to leave, Ilara called a pack gathering. Every wolf assembled in the great clearing, their faces turned toward her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. 6 months ago, Ilara began, her voice carrying across the clearing, I stood in this clearing and watched Marcus die by my hand. Before that, I was nobody, an Omega in the kitchens, invisible and powerless. Alpha King Dimitri changed that when he chose me to lead this pack. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled wolves. So many familiar faces. Wolves she'd watched grow from children to adults, elders who'd lived here for decades, newcomers who'd found refuge in Silvercrest during her leadership. This pack has healed, Ilara continued. You've rebuilt trust, found your strength again, and that's because of all of you. Your willingness to change, to embrace a different kind of leadership. Sarah has proven herself as Beta, capable and wise. She's ready to be your Alpha. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. Alpha King Dimitri has asked me to be his chosen mate, to help him govern all the northern territories, and I've decided to accept. Ilara's voice strengthened. I can do more good working alongside him, ensuring that what we've built here, fairness, compassion, justice, spreads to every pack in the north. Riley reminded me that change doesn't stop at our borders. The young Omega beamed from her spot in the crowd. This isn't goodbye, Ilara said. Silvercrest will always be my home, and I'll visit often. But it's time for me to expand my reach, to fight for wolves everywhere who need someone to stand up for them. The pack howled their approval, the sound echoing through the forest. Sarah came forward, tears streaming down her face, and Ilara embraced her carefully. You're ready, Ilara whispered. Trust yourself. Later that night, in the privacy of her quarters, Dimitri pulled her into his arms. You're sure about this? Terrified, Ilara admitted. But yes, I'm sure. He kissed her deeply, pouring months of restrained emotion into it. When they finally broke apart, he produced a silver chain from his pocket. Hanging from it was a moonstone that gleamed in the firelight. The mark of my chosen mate, Dimitri said, fastening it around her neck. From this moment forward, you're not just Ilara of Silvercrest. You're Ilara Volkov, my partner in all things. She touched the stone, feeling its warmth against her skin. I like the sound of that. They left Silvercrest 2 days later. Dimitri's retinue expanded to include Ilara. As they rode away from the packhouse, Ilara looked back one last time at the place that had shaped her. She saw Sarah standing on the steps, tall and confident, ready to lead. The pack had gathered to see them off, their faces filled with hope rather than fear. Elara had started as a forgotten Omega, feeding a prisoner in the dungeons. She'd been betrayed by the wolf she tried to help, thrust into leadership she never sought, and forced to kill to protect what she'd built. But through it all, she'd discovered her own strength, found love in unexpected places, and learned that power was only meaningful when used to lift others up. As the Northern Territories opened before her, vast and full of possibility, Elara felt ready. Whatever challenges awaited, she'd face them with Dimitri at her side, two wolves who understood that true leadership meant serving those who couldn't serve themselves. The girl who'd been invisible had become impossible to ignore, and she was just getting started.